Mama rindo, chupa chorando, engole gritando, pouco salivando. Boa noite, amigas. Tenta usar agora o comando, o Ticuzão. E aí, Grave! Boa noite, amiga Grayzão, Cinzão. E aí, príncipe da quarta-feira, como é que você tá, velho? E aí, Ander? Que pariu, velho. É a coisa do mundo.
Era esse host que você queria? Era esse mesmo. Ai,
Vambora, né?
que delícia de host, cara.
Se um cara para o próprio pau, ele é gay de si mesmo, não. Ele tá se masturbando no modo advanced. Eu quero que os animais se lasquem. Eu é que preciso ser salvo nessa porra. Mas se lasquem, velho. Ah, depende. Peguei cena... Tem cena do Chrono Cross, tem cena do... Jump, J-Star Versus. Cena do Chrono Trigger. Agora a música de Gintama. Catezão.
Oh, sorry about that. Just give that rewind button a tap and we'll see if we can't start walking around things instead of into them.
Naruto, não presta. Eu prefiro mais assistir Jojo. Jojo.
If you ever find yourself in a pickle, just remember that you can take a step back and try something else. Now, give these a whirl and see where they get you.
Fábio está de volta. Está de volta aos machos, aos homens. Manda mensagem aí, Fábio, pra eu ter que imitar o bicho, vai. Manda mensagem aí, velho. Manda aí. Carizão. E aí, Cold Angel, como é que você tá, amiga?
Stars.
There you go. Remember, Theo, you can look around at any time. What's that just there? Maybe you should give it a peek.
FBI. Caixa de gatos estranha.
I wonder what that's doing sitting around here. Maybe you should keep your eyes open for other interesting things. You never know what you'll find. Well, we're done here. Go on, leap into your family's arms. Lauren and Nathaniel are waiting.
Ok. É uma investigação de gatos.
What was that? Oh, okay. Well, after being woken unceremoniously by a sudden noise, our hero Theo felt that if he was to be kept awake, he deserved to know why.
Loli. Vai continuar reconhecido.
Although Theo felt the lure of sleep and the comfort of his bed, he really should
gato
go
fala.
and investigate this ruckus.
O gato fala. Fala pra ele mesmo, né?
Hearing the yelling from the kitchen, Theo wondered if he had really moved from his bed just to listen to some tiff.
Perturbação, a vez foi jogada para o lado. Mais usada, mas mesmo assim o uso é grandioso. A pose estranha não esconde a felicidade e o orgulho nessa foto.
Despite his efforts, Theo couldn't simply stay here forever. He had to find out what was happening.
Ah, porra, velho. Estão matando alguém ali, velho.
Perhaps things were a little more serious than he'd thought.
Estão matando alguém na cozinha, velho. Porra. Eu ia perguntar. Mama rindo ou chupa chorando?
Except, what was that he could see across the room? He had to take a closer look.
Ih, rapaz, matando mesmo, ó. Tem um cadáver ali. É do jogo.
God. Theo couldn't believe what he was seeing. His family, motionless on the floor. But that was it. No gun? Nothing at all. Was someone else here? As he turned away, Theo could only think about one thing.
Mataram os dois, na verdade, a mulher e o cara, né? Alguém matou os dois caras aqui. Prato de comida do Theo, dos bens mais preciosos de Theo, vendo se a gente pode sem sites ou comida.
Although things looked bleak, Theo had to press on. He had to.
Será que eu...
É um amante mesmo. Ah, mas e aí? Eu quero achar um... Tem aqui. Ah! Uma selfie de Jojo tirada na Diversão depois da faculdade enviada para seus pais. Será que foi esse tal de Jojo que matou os pais?
Cautiously examining the hallway, Theo saw no signs of the killer. Instead, he found a path of destruction carved through strange machines before him.
Robô deslocado. Sentado na entrada querendo aos pedaços. Diversão! Como em todos os relógios de uma casa, o tic-tac é um relógio da marcha inexorável do universo com uma entropia. Caralho, o gato pensando em entropia, velho. Que porra de gato é esse, velho? Pensando em entropia? Caralho. Então tá, né?
The deeper into the room Theo moved, the more he realized that something was amiss. That bright red light hadn't always been there, had it?
Action Murder. M2A.
Although he could not shake the image of his departed owners, Theo suddenly found himself somewhere very different indeed. However, before he could appreciate his new surroundings, he found his attention drawn to the glowing hot wall of energy in front of him.
Aguardar. Oh.
Faced with something so... Ah! Faced with something so clearly hazardous, he thought it might be... Ah! Faced with something... Oh no! Ah! Faced with something so clearly hazardous, he thought it might... No!
Tem conquista pra isso.
Something so clearly hazardous, he thought
Tem
it might be
conquista pra
wise
isso. Eu
to
matei
take a
10 vezes,
moment
velho.
to think before diving head... Ah!
Caralho, viado.
Faced with something so clearly hazardous, he thought it... Oh, no!
Tem conquista pra isso. Tá pipocando aqui, velho. Morri 8 de 10 vezes.
Faced with something so clearly hazardous...
Caralho, viado. Que viagem é essa, velho?
Faced with something so clearly hazardous, he thought it might be wise to... Ah!
Pô, eu queria pegar eu queria pegar o overlay do Steam pra vocês verem. Eu ganhei a conquista agora, eu ganhei a conquista. Vou desintegrado por laser 10 vezes. Não sou eu que sou psicopata, é o jogo, velho.
Faced with something so clearly hazardous, he thought it might be wise to take a moment to think before diving headlong into oblivion.
O moderno e o ameaçador, imóvel e inútil.
Oh, what a pleasant surprise. After his daring maneuver, Theo found that he was still alive. Clearly, Theo didn't have time to mess about with a killer on the loose. Perhaps that vent offered a way forwards.
Caralho, velho. Porra, jogo de maluco mesmo. Eu tenho que matar o gato pra pegar a conquista, velho. Que doideira da
Theo
porra.
was immensely relieved to find no deadly lasers when he emerged from the vent. On the other hand, he was instead faced with a functional, frantic, and quite soggy security robot.
Eu gostei desse jogo. Caixinha EP chamado Furgos. Um gerador infeliz que gira suas rolinhas tentando limpar a sujeira dos outros. Caralho! Tem alguma coisa aqui, são 3 bagulho. Jobzão! Achei 2. Precisa proteger seus ativos submersos. Essa maravilha da tecnologia é explosiva e vai mostrar rapidamente que é propriedade privada. What the fuck? Eita. Ô caralho! Isso. Peraí.
As he skirted by the distracted machine, Theo found himself eyeing the hole-riddled aquarium. Either someone was stalking the halls shooting at water features, or the security needed to work on their aim. Though the appeal of fresh fish was enticing, it was offset by the risk of an unexpected bath. Rather than contemplate such a terrible fate any further, Theo decided to make a quick exit.
Furtividade.
Advancing cautiously, Theo was encouraged by the sight of another aquarium, this time with the water safely inside, not threatening to
Curioso com esse jogo.
unpleasantly dampen his fur. There was no time to fish, however, as security appeared to be taking its job a touch more seriously.
Viva, não sei. Morto é, nem pra situação com certeza. Na jovem deveria ser o ser vivo mais importante do mundo.
Although Theo could be easily distracted, he knew when it was time to focus. That time had arrived.
Uso de arma portátil. Confiável, pequena e eficaz, uma perfeita para os assecas profissionais, com vários upgrades para suas necessidades. What the... Não.
Era esse host que você queria? Era esse mesmo. Que delícia.
Tearing his attention away from the unattainable, Theo delicately stepped between the broken remains of some very expensive-looking showpieces. Despite his lack of any understanding of fine
E
art,
aí, tá demais. Quanto tempo? Como é que você tá?
before him.
Ah, meu Deus. Sério isso? Vou matar 10 vezes de novo. Jogo bem interessante, bem diferentinho. Bem devasso.
Having successfully weaved past the searching eyes of the guard, he was overjoyed to see that he could just follow the killer through a door, instead of crawling through the ventilation like a rodent.
Seu fã.
Theo cast his eyes about the grandiose room, the impressive decor marred by the smoking wreckage of robotic guards. Clearly, someone with no respect for interior design had been this way.
Design de interiores.
However, hanging over the remains of a reception desk, Theo spotted something that took his interest. Bright Paw Industries.
O nome do jogo. Bright Paw. Quando um pai da Xeliga não sai do seu lugar mesmo recepção. Trabalho. Gestosa paga da empresa deslocada. Máquina automática.
Although this place was impressive, Theo knew he had precious little time to admire it.
Aê, Dinzão! Boa, meu macho! Isso aí, velho.
Despite the damage, the underlying class of this Bright Paw establishment was clear. The placement of several large aquariums, brimming with exotic fish, was an inspired design choice that Theo could respect. Theo crossed the room, breathing in the intoxicating fragrance of fish, while taking care to avoid the remaining hazards. As he did, his mind began to wander. Why was a place like this situated beneath his home? And more importantly, why had these fishy treats not been brought to his attention before? At first glance, it appeared that Theo had stumbled into a storage room for broken glass. Except there were other items in the glittering fragments. Grenades,
Eu vim ver o
missiles,
macaco.
an umbrella.
Pacify, amiga. Isso aqui é de clássico. Guarda-chuva letal. Pô, que isso? É Kingsman agora, essa merda? Opa, água. Eita, tem um bagulho falando aí, velho. Ligado, vai me pegar, velho.
Theo padded behind the guard, pondering his discoveries. A hidden underground facility, robotic security, and now rooms filled with odd weapons. What on earth was this place?
Macho Cross.
Looking back, Theo considered that it was perhaps unwise to leave such destructive toys lying around. On the other hand, there was no way someone would leave live explosives on display. Probably best to ignore it and hurry on.
Joguinho até que interessante esse Bright Paw aí, comparado com as tranquilas que eu já joguei.
Theo contemplated the ruins of the once magnificent boardroom, which had been reduced to little more than burnt mahogany by some kind of explosion. Apparently, the killer had needed to clear the room in a hurry. But why? Oh, perhaps those lasers were a motivator.
Porra. Rise, o joguinho de carro lá. É jogo bom. Aquele do tiro? Qual do tiro? Jujubá! Jujubadão! Anúncio de granada. Ah, aquele que parecia a Hotline Miami. Sim.
With the wall of death slowly advancing, Theo scrambled for a plan to slip by. There, across the room, a shattered glass wall offering a glimpse of escape.
E aí, Alejo? Alejadão.
Deftly avoiding glass with his paws, Theo found his eyes drawn to a large portrait on the wall. Was that Nathaniel? As he stood, he wondered, how much of all this was his master responsible for? Someone had clearly been rifling through the deliveries recently, though they didn't seem to have found what they were looking for.
Ah, o X é reset. Mas lembrando, a jogatina pode ser estendida e lives podem ser liberadas. Relaxa, Alejo. É só um molinho disso aqui, depois a gente vai pro Macho Cross, velho. Vamos amar homens usando elementos para temperar as partes íntimas, velho. Fiz uma live extra ontem e uma hoje, então o débito está quitado. Graças ao Jaiderzão. Agradeço ao Jaider que modalizou a gente no final de semana, velho. Pra ter essas lives extras aí. Plano do bot patrulha. Rede de frascos vazio. Tu acha que é preconceituoso da nossa parte? Não, elas... Acho que os dois estavam errados, velho.
Waiting for
É isso, os dois se entregaram ao pecado e queriam transar. É isso, resumo da história, os dois queriam fuder. Pronto, acabou. Vai lá, Megan. Vai jogar cassino?
Obviously, the killer had been looting the facility. And it was unlikely
Ajubadão!
that he planned to
Ó, o
use
de
what
Chihuahua
he
aí,
had
amigo. Dá com saudade, meu macho, tudo bem?
Being a conscientious cat, Theo knew it fell to him to put a stop to the killer's nefarious activities.
Eu quero é ver um homem!
Finding himself inside a warehouse, the towering stacks of crates gave Theo some measure of hope. Perhaps the killer would try to search the top of an unstable pile and fall to their doom.
Achar que minas aquáticas. Bora. E aí, amiga? E aí, Little Milk, como é que você tá? Olha,
Lost in daydreams of the killer being buried alive, Theo stepped blindly forwards onto a conveyor belt, promptly shuffling him away from his happy thoughts.
Perhaps he should pay more attention to where he's going.
Arquezão.
Perhaps it was unlikely that the killer would be ended by fallen cargo. But the belts leading into the dark and deadly machinery seemed to promise an untimely demise.
Casa grande, hein? Porra.
Spotting a bundle under some nearby crates, it appeared Theo's wishes had been heard. However, he tempered his excitement until he could get a closer look.
É. Total.
Theo tempered his excitement, he didn't lose it.
Big House? Cusão!
Stepping over a broken belt with great care, he was disappointed to discover not a body, but simply several empty crates bearing the label High Explosive.
The empty crates led Theo to conclude three things. The killer had found what they were looking for, they were definitely up to something, and Theo's work was not yet done. He moved on with the hope that the killer's loot would be enough to slow them down.
Aqui é a pata brilhante, Federicozão. Grande amigo do
Theo
Chaves.
pondered the erratic crusade of the robots as they fired at non-existent threats. Perhaps the killer had just passed through?
Sério, de Chihuahua? Vai ter que ver qual é o seu som. O som que você vai querer, velho. O som do prazer, velho. Em ver o Shianderuzão da Rokutão. O Maiwa. Mo Shianderu. Ali. Obrigado, Desfalazão. Amanhã eu quero saber qual vai ser o seu sonho, hein? The Pleasure Sound.
The belt, unable to tell the difference between a cat and a crate, and lacking the desire to learn, moved him once again as it would any other box.
Desenho misterioso.
As he headed for the door, Theo couldn't shake the feeling that the strange blue algae was creeping steadily across the wall behind him. Oh well, it was probably harmless.
Cuidar, amiga.
Whoever Theo was following had certainly spooked these poor robots who were all consumed by blind panic.
Amiiigos, vende algas grandes. Aqui britânico. Foguetório. Foguete do prazer, velho. Pleasure Rockets. Chegou a jogar na quebrada. Abiscos.
As he carefully paddled
Nude, eu vou mandar o
avoiding
nude do
lasers,
fantasma pra ti.
Theo noticed the most curious drawing etched into the wall. But why would a killer stop to doodle? Ah!
Tem eu aí? Sexo, velho. Sexo.
A Rua Augusta possui 2 travesti e o preço dos programas delas é mais caro.
É o jogo do prazer, ô Docuzão. Vou entrar pra ele. NoFap, como tão? Pera aí, velho, que NoFap?
Theo couldn't stop thinking about the bizarre graffiti he kept seeing. It was unlikely the killer was taking the time for artistic creativity. Was someone else in the facility?
Gizang.
As he stepped into the room,
Gizang, Ginseng, velho.
by yet
O novo apelido do Guzang agora é Ginseng, velho. E aí, Ginseng? Guzang é o caralho. Ginseng, velho.
Theo tried his best to examine the etching, but found it devoid of artistic value.
Tchau.
A for effort, he supposed.
Nataliazão. Etaurozão. Vendo aí? O Guzão é bom, pô. O Guzão é uma boa companhia. Ele faz o sangue circular melhor, velho. Guzeng. Melhora a ereção, exatamente. Zoa mais, não é comigo mesmo. Relaxa, fantasmoso. A sua dose já tá vindo aí. A sua dose de sequestrador de louro tá vindo aí, velho.
Eu não tenho pedra, filha da puta!
As he began to move away, Theo couldn't help but wonder who would put so much effort into these acts of vandalism. Was it maybe some kind of
Diversão.
poorly drawn calling card? Perhaps, he thought as he carried on, the murderer was simply an awful artist. Whatever it was, the mural failed to hold Theo's interest long enough for any meaning to be gleaned.
Perna atômica.
According to the booming sounds of heavy industry and the massive shipping containers, Theo had found himself in some kind of loading station.
Como é que é? Tchau. Carregando, gravar tá óbvio. Eu me senti como o som do sub do ceboso. Qual? Guzang? Ginseng? Não. Ah. Só conheço o Ginseng, velho.
Theo's eye was caught by something colorful and clearly out of place hanging from a rail across the room. A discarded tie. Was this some kind of taunt?
Sempre, Jujubadão. Jujubadão, sempre. Jujubadão. Jujuba do Adão. Porque a Suelão é a Jujuba do Adão, entendeu? Tudo agora é do Adão. Já disse o Elementoso ontem, tudo agora é do Adão, velho.
It was becoming clear to Theo that the large boxes wouldn't just wait for him to cross, so he quickened his pace towards the infuriating clue. Clearly the killer had left this tie to send a message, but in doing so,
Tudo é do Adão.
trail for Theo to
Esse aqui
follow.
meu cu tá nessa reta, tá na reta do Adão, velho.
Of them yet.
Ó, fantasmão, fantasmoso, fantasmadão, fantasma do Adão, fantabosa. Fantasma com babosa.
Surprisingly expressive train waiting before him.
O Adão é possessivo.
Curious hole in the wall drew his
Ele
eye.
quer tudo, né?
Perhaps the killer had made their own exit.
Xiandão, o Xian do Adão. Xian do Adão, velho. Nossa, se tirar o Fantabosta. Que isso, amigo? Fantabosta não, velho. Rapaz, Fantabosta, velho. Essa Fantabosta é uma Fanta feita com o cu. O cara socou o extrato de laranja no cu, cagou e fez uma Fantabosta, velho. Eu vou pra outra live, velho. Fantasma gozo. Porra, fantasma gozo é o quê? É o gozo fantasma? É verdade, fantasma trepa, velho. Fantasmas trepam? O Gasparzinho é o filho do Gaspar? Porque o Gasparzinho ele já parece um esperma, né, velho? Caralho, o Gasparzinho é filho do Fantasmoso, velho? Eu achei que o
Though he was intrigued by the surprisingly expressive train waiting before him, on the other side of the tracks, a curious hole in the wall drew his eye.
Olha o PGzão,
Perhaps the
velho.
killer had made their own exit.
Se você me provar que é o Guzang da Sopra-Fitas, velho. Cara, a pergunta que fica é: um fantasma, ele tem cu? Fantasma tem cu? Pra cagar e peidar? Ectoplasma ou não?
Stepping onto the train, Theo glanced towards his goal and noticed a strangely carefree-looking robot bumbling around near a control panel.
Todosão.
Hopefully this one wasn't a threat.
Não tem? Fantasmoso, como é que você caga então, velho?
The train began to quake, and Theo couldn't react fast enough to leap off. He had better find something to hold on to.
Jason!
Theo was
Pedalzão!
quite for the sudden velocity and found his current predicament extremely upsetting. Luckily, he just needed to hold on until the train looped back to the station.
Tá porra, velho. É verdade, o Fantasmoso cagou no lençol, né, velho? Caralho, o Fantasmoso, ele cagou no lençol, velho. Ele conseguiu carimbar o lençol, mano.
Theo was quite unprepared for the sudden velocity and found his current predicament extremely upsetting. Luckily, he just needed to hold on until the train looped back to the station.
Foi o Guzang do assopra-fita. Ele tomou coca pelo cu. É, exatamente. Exatamente. Ó, Guzão, o desafio vai ser o seguinte. Manda uma foto pro PGzão provando que você não é o Guzang e ele vai te dar um sub. Pronto.
Naruto não presta. Eu prefiro
Entendi.
mais assistir Jojo.
Guzão, que não é o Guzang, mandando uma foto, assoprando uma fita, mostrando que não é o Guzang que assopra fitas. Porque na verdade, o Guzang do assopra fitas, ele não assopra fitas. Mas o Guzão, que não é o Guzang, ele assopra a fita porque ele não é o Guzang que não assopra a fita. Entendeu? Vou mudar de canal. Os Gustavos não sobrevivem ao canal, velho. Ginseng numa especiaria? Mais especial que o Guzão é impossível, velho.
Ai, Gustavo. Ai,
Pra tancar o que ele tanca.
ai, caralho, Gustavo.
Eu li no Discord lá, tu sofreu preconceito por TBR, né? Caralho. Foda, né, bicho? Deixa eu ver com o meu poder.
As the hatch broke free and rocketed past him, Theo pressed himself against the train and vowed to dedicate the rest of the ride to keeping his eyes
Igozão.
open for low-flying objects of feline destruction.
Pede uma foto do pé dele, ô PGzão. Autorizão.
Theo might have found some comfort knowing he wasn't the only one caught unaware by the sudden departure. But it was all he could do to just keep his paws on the ground.
fodeu. Ou não. Porra, velho. O cara podia me ajudar, tá vendo? Bote flamejante, velho. Não, ao contrário. Se você não for o Guzang, porra. Não, é uma aposta perdida, pô. Você quase quer, por quê? O que aconteceu? Então, é exatamente isso. É pra você provar que não é. A forma pra você provar que não é o Guzang, aí você ganha um sub, entendeu? Você ganha a pergunta que não é. Por isso que ele quer uma foto da sua rola. Digo. Ah, caralho, velho. Pãozão. Eita, eu vou até em chamada contigo. Caralho! Agora o Guzão... Agora o Guzão despertou o macho, velho. Despertou o homem. Caralho.
Theo staggered off the train quickly, driven by his newfound appreciation for solid ground and the terrible fear that it might suddenly set off again. Just ahead of him, he could see that bloody robot that had sent the train off in the first place. As he followed the irritating machine through the jagged opening in the wall, Theo hoped that he wouldn't ever have to lay eyes on it again.
Quando não descorre a foto do pé, pronto. O pé do Guzão. Guzão's foot.
Theo eyed his new surroundings curiously, noting the piles of unused tiles and pipes. Across what little floor existed, there was a sharp drop, from which a blinding light and tremendous heat emanated.
Pé que ia soprando fitas. Pé que ia soprando fitas. Bota assim, uma foto do pé e um cartucho ali do pé, tá ligado? A soprando fita com o pé, mano. Caralho. Porra.
He averted his eyes from the robot and simply pretended that it did not exist.
Essa é pra tu, eu tô ligado, velho, tô ligado. Me valorize mais.
To move on and leave that robotic liability behind. Surely the killer couldn't be too far now. Entering another area with limited flooring, Theo wondered why all of these rooms seemed so unfinished. Maybe they're... It was starting to look like Theo might have a tail. No pun intended.
Ele vai colocar no Twitter do Barack Obama.
Oh, apparently Theo's new friend had some value after all. Theo Theo regarded the newly risen barrier and wondered just how the robot had managed to cause this latest setback. Fortunately, Theo had the bare minimum of competence needed to qualify as sentient life, allowing him to fix the issue. Unfortunately, as the oblivious robot scampered over an obvious switch, Theo braced for the
Exclamação social.
consequences. When none presented themselves, he decided to stay on alert. There was no way he was safe while that machine was bumping into things. Contemplating the state of the room ahead, Theo reluctantly accepted that perhaps the robot's help might be necessary. As he threw a disparaging glance at the machine, Theo noticed some worn writing on his chassis. D4Z.
Vamos valorizar o homem, velho. Let's valorize the man, velho. Let's valorizar the man. Tô cagando. Olha uma foto da bosta. Grão de gato.
As a loud noise reverberated behind Theo, he wondered just what he had done to be cursed with a trundling mishap. Though his companion seemed to be some kind of cosmic setback magnet, Theo had to admit, Daz was endearing, aggravatingly so.
Jogo bonitinho, velho.
Overwhelmed by the heat pouring from the broken machine,
Acabar esse capítulo aqui, a gente tem troca de jogo. Tá?
Safety standards. How on earth was he going to reach the elevators beyond this mess?
Mas o Guzão tá fazendo um sorvete de bosta. Já tá produzindo o cucolate já, velho. Deixa ele limpar a bunda primeiro, velho. Na moral.
Theo flinched when he heard the now familiar sound of Daz activating another switch. He cautiously opened his eyes and was pleasantly surprised to see something positive had finally come from this robot's help.
Cabedal. Down. Tava na aula bad, amigo. Pô, na aula ruim?
O mago nunca se atrasa, Frodo Bolseiro. Nem se adianta. Ele chega exatamente quando pretende chegar.
Penetração tripla. Caralho.
Isso aqui é uma porcaria que não merda nenhuma. Desculpe.
Tem camisa, ele adora. Caralho, velho. É. Guardiãozão.
As Daz hurried into the elevator, Theo found himself growing slightly less aggrieved. Perhaps having the little fellow around might even be useful.
Podeção, massa. Isso não me interessa
As
mais.
the elevator rattled to a screeching halt, Theo found himself suspended on what could kindly be referred to as a rough and ready bridge, or not so kindly as an invitation to a long plummet to certain death. Theo watched as Daz leapt gracefully down onto the scaffold to aid in his journey across.